You've been driving yourself crazy, trying to figure out why he's suddenly acting distant after everything seemed perfect between you, analyzing every text, every conversation, every moment wondering what you did wrong or why he's pulling away, right when you thought he was falling for you. Here's the truth that will blow your mind. Sigmund Freud discovered over a century ago that the human psyche has a twisted way of protecting itself from the very thing it wants most. And when a man truly loves you, his unconscious mind might see that love as the greatest threat he's ever faced. What I'm about to reveal will completely change how you interpret his confusing behavior and show you why his distance might actually be the strongest evidence that you've captured his heart in ways that terrify him to his core. Stay with me, because this psychological secret will transform everything you thought you knew about love and why the men who matter most sometimes seem to care the least. When a man truly loves you, his psyche enters a state of complete vulnerability that terrifies him to his core. Freud discovered that our minds create defense mechanisms to protect us from overwhelming emotions, and love is perhaps the most overwhelming emotion of all. The deeper his feelings, the more his unconscious mind scrambles to build walls around his heart. This isn't cruelty, it's survival instinct kicking in at the deepest psychological level. Think of it like touching a hot stove. Your hand pulls away automatically before your conscious mind even registers the heat. Defense mechanisms work below the surface of awareness, which means he genuinely doesn't understand why he's pulling away from you. His rational mind wants to be close, but his unconscious mind is screaming danger signals because love means potential loss, rejection, and emotional annihilation. Freud called this the ego's attempt to protect itself from what it perceives as a threat to psychological stability. The irony is devastating. The very thing he wants most becomes the thing his mind tells him to avoid. It's like being thirsty in the desert, but afraid to drink water because you might choke. This psychological paradox explains why the men who ignore you might actually be the ones who love you most deeply. Their avoidance isn't indifference. It's emotional overwhelm disguised as disinterest. When you understand this, you stop taking his distance personally and start seeing it for what it really is, a scared human being trying to protect himself from the most beautiful and terrifying experience life has to offer. The key is recognizing that his behavior is about his internal struggle, not about your worth or desirability. Love triggers his deepest fears, and sometimes running away feels safer than facing the possibility of losing everything that matters. Reaction formation is one of Freud's most fascinating defense mechanisms, where the mind completely reverses a threatening feeling into its opposite. When a man experiences overwhelming love for you, his unconscious mind might flip that emotion entirely, making him act cold, distant, or even slightly cruel. This isn't manipulation or game playing. It's his psyche literally transforming love into apparent dislike to make the feeling manageable. Imagine your mind as a protective parent that sees love as dangerous, so it dresses up that love in the costume of indifference to keep you safe from potential heartbreak. The stronger the original feeling, the more dramatic the opposite behavior becomes. You've probably witnessed this in action when a man who seemed completely uninterested suddenly confesses deep feelings after months of treating you like you barely existed. His brain was working overtime to convince him and you that he didn't care, because caring felt too risky. Freud observed that we often become most hostile toward what we secretly desire most, and this applies perfectly to men who are terrified of love. The guy who acts like you're invisible might be the same one who thinks about you constantly, dreams about you, and panics at the thought of losing you. His coldness is actually a thermometer measuring the heat of his true feelings. The cruelest part of reaction formation is that it punishes both people involved. He suffers by denying himself what he wants most and you suffer by receiving the opposite of what he actually feels. This mechanism kicks in strongest when he perceives you as someone who could truly matter, someone who could hurt him if things went wrong, if he treats you with casual indifference while being warm with others. Congratulations, you might have triggered his deepest psychological defenses. The goal isn't to break through his walls aggressively, but to recognize that his coldness might be love wearing a mask, protecting itself from a world that taught him vulnerability equals danger. The Oedipal complex doesn't disappear when we grow up. It transforms and continues influencing our adult relationships in ways most people never recognize. For men, this complex creates a deep unconscious fear that loving a woman completely might somehow betray or abandon the first woman in his life, his mother. When he feels himself falling deeply for you, his psyche might interpret this as a threat to his original bond, triggering anxiety that manifests as withdrawal or emotional distance. This isn't about wanting his mother romantically, it's about the psychological imprint that says complete devotion to a woman brings danger and conflict. His unconscious mind remembers being small and powerless in the face of feminine energy, and now that same energy in you awakens those old fears. Adult men often struggle with what Freud called the Madonna whore complex, where they unconsciously categorize women as either pure and unattainable or sexual and temporary. When you trigger his deepest love, you threaten to break this neat psychological categorization, and his mind doesn't know how to process someone who could be both deeply loved and deeply desired. This internal conflict creates cognitive dissonance that he resolves by pulling away from you entirely. The closer you get to representing everything he wants in a woman, the more his Oedipal programming kicks in to create distance. It's like his psyche is saying you're too perfect, too complete, therefore too dangerous to fully embrace. The most heartbreaking part is that his withdrawal often happens right when things are going best between you, because that's exactly when his unconscious fears reach peak intensity. He's not rejecting you, he's rejecting the terrifying possibility of complete surrender to feminine power. Men who have unresolved Oedipal issues will consistently sabotage relationships with women who could actually fulfill them deeply. The solution isn't to become less amazing to make him comfortable, but to understand that his fear of loving you completely stems from psychological programming he developed before he could even speak. When you recognize this pattern, you can see his distance as evidence of your impact on him, not evidence of his lack of interest. Projection is perhaps the cruelest defense mechanism because it takes a man's own fears and insecurities and makes them your problem instead of his. When he's terrified of being hurt, abandoned, or rejected, his unconscious mind projects those fears onto you and begins treating you as if you're the threat. He starts seeing you as someone who will eventually leave, even when you've given him no reason to believe this. His mind creates elaborate stories about your potential betrayal because it's easier to prepare for imaginary future pain than to sit with present vulnerability. Think of projection like a movie projector in his mind that takes his internal horror, film, and displays it onto the screen of your relationship. The most confusing part is that his projection often manifests as accusations or assumptions that seem to come from nowhere. He might suddenly become convinced you're losing interest, talking to other men, or planning to leave him, even when the opposite is true. These aren't rational thoughts. They're his terror of abandonment wearing the mask of suspicion about your behavior. Freud understood that we can't tolerate our own psychological pain, so we unconsciously hand it to someone else to carry. When he projects his fear of being hurt onto you, he gets temporary relief from his anxiety while simultaneously pushing away the very person he's afraid of losing. The tragic irony is that projection becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. His behavior, based on imaginary threats, often creates the real problems he was trying to avoid. When he treats you like you're going to leave, you eventually might actually consider leaving because of how he treats you. This is his unconscious mind's twisted way of maintaining control. It's better to create the abandonment himself than to risk it happening to him unexpectedly. Understanding projection helps you recognize that his suspicious or distant behavior often reflects his own internal landscape, not anything you've actually done. The stronger his projection, the more terrified he is of losing you, because we only project our deepest fears onto things that matter most to us. The unconscious mind is like an iceberg, with only a tiny portion visible above the surface while the massive bulk operates completely below his awareness. Freud revealed that most of our behavior is driven by unconscious motivations, meaning when he ignores or distances himself from you, he genuinely has no idea why he's doing it. His conscious mind might be telling him to call you, spend time with you, and show you affection, but his unconscious mind is pulling the strings in the opposite direction. This creates internal conflict that manifests as confusing behavior. He says one thing, feels another, and acts in a third completely different way. It's like having 3 different people living in his head who never communicate with each other. His unconscious mind stores every rejection, heartbreak, and disappointment he's ever experienced with women, creating a protective database that activates whenever he feels vulnerable again. When you trigger deep feelings in him, this database starts running background programs designed to keep him safe from past pain. He doesn't consciously choose to pull away. His unconscious mind makes that choice for him based on old programming he's not even aware exists. Think of it like antivirus software running on a computer. It automatically blocks potential threats without asking permission from the user. The problem is that his unconscious defines love itself as a virus that needs to be quarantined. The most important thing to understand is that his unconscious behavior isn't personal, it's programmed. When he becomes distant right after a beautiful moment together, his unconscious mind interpreted that beauty as danger and activated protective protocols. He wakes up the next day genuinely confused about why he doesn't want to text you back, why he feels anxious about seeing you, or why he's suddenly finding flaws in the relationship. This unconscious sabotage often increases in direct proportion to how much he actually cares about you. The deeper the love, the louder his unconscious alarm bells ring, creating behavior that seems to contradict everything he consciously wants. Transference is one of Freud's most powerful discoveries, revealing how we unconsciously transfer feelings, expectations, and patterns from past relationships onto current ones. When a man loves you deeply, his unconscious mind doesn't just see you, it sees every woman who ever hurt him, disappointed him, or left him standing there wondering what went wrong. His mother who was emotionally unavailable, his first girlfriend who cheated, his ex-wife who walked away, they're all suddenly projected onto you like ghosts haunting your relationship. He's not responding to who you actually are. He's responding to a composite image of every feminine wound he's ever carried. This is why his reactions to you might seem completely disproportionate to what's actually happening between you. The cruelest part of transference is that you become responsible for crimes you never committed, paying the emotional price for damage other women caused years or even decades ago. When he pulls away from your love, he might unconsciously be protecting himself from his mother's conditional affection or his ex's sudden departure. His brain creates a psychological time machine that brings past pain into present moments, making him treat your kindness with suspicion and your consistency with disbelief. You're not dating just him, you're dating his entire relationship history. And sometimes that history votes against giving you a real chance. The more you resemble what he's always wanted, the more his past traumas scream warnings about what happened last time he felt this way. Understanding transference helps you realize that his hot and cold behavior often has nothing to do with your actions and everything to do with his internal relationship museum. When he suddenly becomes distant after you've been nothing but loving, his unconscious mind might be saying, "This is exactly how it started before, right before everything fell apart." The key is recognizing that he's not seeing you clearly. He's seeing you through the filter of old wounds that haven't healed. Your job isn't to prove you're different from his past. Your job is to understand that his withdrawal might actually be evidence of how much you matter to him. His unconscious only activates these protective mechanisms for relationships that have the power to hurt him deeply. Freud discovered that humans have two primary drives battling within us: eros, which seeks life, love, and connection, and thanatos, the death drive, which seeks to return to a state of non-existence and peace. When a man truly loves you, his eros is screaming to bond with you, create something beautiful together, and build a life filled with passion and meaning. But simultaneously, his death drive whispers that all good things end in pain, that attachment leads to suffering, and that the safest state is emotional numbness, where nothing and no one can hurt him. This internal war creates the maddening push-pull behavior, where he moves toward you with love, then retreats with destructive patterns. He's literally fighting a psychological civil war between his desire for life and his desire for peace through isolation. The death drive doesn't want him to literally die. It wants his emotional self to die, because emotions, especially love, create vulnerability and potential pain. When he sabotages your relationship by picking fights, creating distance, or acting in ways that push you away, his death drive is winning the battle against his life drive. This self-destruction feels safer to his unconscious mind than risking the devastation that could come from loving you completely and then losing you. It's like his psyche is saying, if we destroy this ourselves, we control the destruction and avoid the unpredictable pain of abandonment or rejection. The death drive convinces him that ending things on his terms is better than having them potentially end on yours. The most tragic part is that the death drive often activates strongest when things are going best in your relationship, because that's when he has the most to lose. His unconscious mind sees happiness as dangerous because it creates something beautiful that could be taken away. Men dominated by their death drive will consistently choose familiar pain over unfamiliar joy, loneliness over love, and self-destruction over self-expansion. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to return to the emotional flatline where nothing matters enough to cause real damage. When you understand this drive, you can see his sabotaging behavior as his psyche's attempt to choose death over the terrifying possibility of truly living and loving with you. Regression is one of the most heartbreaking defense mechanisms to witness, because it transforms a grown man into the frightened child he once was, complete with all the same fears and coping strategies he used decades ago. When deep love activates his most vulnerable emotions, his psyche literally travels backward in time to earlier developmental stages, where he felt safer and had less responsibility for managing complex feelings. Suddenly, the successful, confident Manu fell for starts acting like a scared little boy who hides when things get too intense, throws emotional tantrums when he feels cornered, or simply shuts down completely when faced with adult relationship challenges. His regression isn't weakness, it's his mind's attempt to return to a time when someone else was responsible for taking care of his emotional needs. The most common regression pattern is the man who becomes emotionally unavailable right when you need him most, because his child self learned that disappearing was the safest response to overwhelming situations. Maybe his parents fought constantly and he survived by becoming invisible. Maybe he was criticized every time he showed emotion, so he learned to hide his feelings. Or maybe he was abandoned emotionally and his young mind decided that needing People was too dangerous. These childhood survival strategies get reactivated when adult love triggers the same feelings of vulnerability he experienced as a powerless child. His regression makes perfect sense when you understand he's not responding. As a grown man, he's responding as the hurt little boy who never learned healthy ways to handle big emotions. The cruelest irony is that regression often happens right when you're offering him exactly what his inner child has always craved: unconditional love and acceptance. But his young psyche doesn't trust good things because good things in childhood often disappeared or came with conditions attached. When you love him consistently, his regressed mind might interpret this as too good to be true, waiting for the other shoe to drop or the love to be withdrawn as punishment. Understanding regression helps you realize that his childlike behavior in response to your adult love isn't immaturity, it's trauma. His little boy self is still running the show, making adult relationship decisions based on childhood fears and survival patterns that are decades out of date. The superego is Freud's term for the internalized voice of society, parents, and culture that constantly judges our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors according to external standards. For men, the superego is loaded with toxic programming about what it means to be masculine, creating internal shame around vulnerability, emotional expression, and deep connection with women. From childhood, boys are taught that real men don't cry, don't need anyone, and certainly don't lose control over their emotions for love. When he feels himself falling deeply for you, his superego starts screaming that he's weak, pathetic, and less of a man for caring so much. This internal critic punishes him for the very feelings that could create the most beautiful relationship of his life. His superego has absorbed decades of cultural messaging that equates emotional availability with femininity and emotional distance with strength. Every movie, song, and story he's consumed has reinforced the idea that cool guys don't chase, real men don't get attached, and masculine power comes from being the one who cares less. When he finds himself thinking about you constantly, missing you desperately, or wanting to share his deepest thoughts and fears with you, his superego launches a full-scale attack on his self-worth. It tells him he's being needy, clingy, and unattractive, that you'll lose respect for him if you see how much he actually cares. This internal shame creates the paradox where loving you deeply makes him feel like less of a man. The tragedy is that his superego is operating on outdated programming that has nothing to do with what actually creates healthy relationships or genuine masculinity. When he pulls away from you to satisfy his internal critic, he's choosing society's approval over his own happiness and yours. His superego would rather have him be lonely but masculine than connected but vulnerable. The most damaging part is that this voice feels like his own thoughts, so he doesn't recognize it as external programming that he can choose to reject. Understanding the superego's role helps you see that his emotional distance isn't about you, or even about his true feelings. It's about him trying to maintain an impossible standard of masculinity that was designed to keep him isolated and emotionally stunted. Sublimation is Freud's term for redirecting powerful emotional energy into socially acceptable activities, and it's perhaps the most sophisticated defense mechanism men use to avoid dealing with their feelings for you. When his love for you becomes too intense to handle directly, his unconscious mind channels that passionate energy into work, hobbies, exercise, creative projects, or even other relationships that feel safer and more controllable. He might suddenly become obsessed with his career, spend hours at the gym, dive into a new passion project, or throw himself into friendships that don't threaten his emotional equilibrium. This isn't conscious avoidance. It's his psyche's brilliant way of using love energy without having to face the vulnerability that comes with actually loving you. The cruel irony is that sublimation can make him incredibly successful and attractive in other areas of his life, while simultaneously making him unavailable to you. All that powerful emotion he feels for you gets transformed into professional achievement, artistic creation, or physical accomplishment, leaving him feeling fulfilled and accomplished while you feel abandoned and confused. His unconscious mind has found the perfect solution. He gets to keep the energy that loving you creates without risking the pain that loving you might bring. You become his secret fuel source, powering his other pursuits while being denied access to the very emotions that are driving his success. The most heartbreaking part of sublimation is that it can last for years, with him building an entire impressive life on the energy he's afraid to direct toward you. He might become the most successful version of himself while keeping you at arm's length, never realizing that his achievements are powered by feelings he's too scared to express directly. When you understand sublimation, you can see that his sudden intense focus on other areas of his life might actually be proof of how powerfully you affect him. The more energy he puts into avoiding direct connection with you, the more evidence you have of the depth of what he actually feels. His sublimation isn't rejection, it's redirection of the most powerful force in his emotional world, his love for you. The next time a man you care about starts pulling away, right when things feel most intense between you, remember that his distance might be the highest compliment his terrified psyche knows how to give you. Freud showed us that the human mind will go to extraordinary lengths to protect itself from vulnerability, and love is the ultimate vulnerability. His avoidance, his mixed signals, his hot and cold behavior, these aren't signs that he doesn't care. They're often signs that he cares so much it scares him to his core. The question is, now that you understand the psychological truth behind his confusing behavior, will you choose to see his fear as evidence of your power over his heart, or will you keep taking his defense mechanisms personally and missing the love that's hiding behind them? If this opened your eyes to the hidden psychology of male behavior, subscribe for more insights that will transform how you understand men and relationships forever.